Good morning. This is Nate. It is Tuesday, April 22nd. Slight change of pace, I think, on this video. I am turning 50 years old on Friday. And staring down the barrel of 50, you have a lot of thoughts, but one of the thoughts that surprised me a little bit was I caught myself trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Which seems odd. You would think I would be fully grown by now. But as I sort of investigated why I was feeling that impulse, I realized that I had some sense that maybe in the past I hadn't had full ownership or a sense of agency in choosing the path that my life is taking. And I imagine most people's lives are kind of like this. It's actually kind of a more juvenile sense of how a life is meant to unfold, that you pick a path and then you follow it. But mine really did wander around a lot. And in some ways, I have a sense that I'm still wandering a little bit. Maybe to unpack that a little bit. I went to college initially for paleontology so long ago that it's hard for me to remember why. I think I just liked dinosaurs, or liked drawing dinosaurs. And pivoted to art fairly quickly in my third year. So maybe not quickly enough from my parents' perspective. But my first job in 1993 was working at my dad's video game company. My dad was the head of a video game company called the Dreamers Guild. And they made CD-ROM games in Chatsworth, California. I grew up in LA. And my first summer after high school, I needed a job, and I knew how to draw, and they needed artists. And back then, there weren't any like digital art educational pipelines. There may have been, but I wasn't aware of any of them. And it was sort of interesting how game companies were mostly comprised of professional wanderers, people from all sorts of surprising walks of life. I remember one of the artists I worked alongside was like a trained printmaker, like a lot of like kind of older hippies, and yeah, a real kind of interesting mix of people. But I fell into that job because it was convenient. There was never a moment, really ever, when I said, I want to be a person who makes video games for a living. In fact, I worked at that company every summer and then studied paleontology in the intervening school years in Chicago, and then switched to painting and drawing about 3 years into that, and then thought I was going to be like a serious painter or an artist, a capital A artist. And again, flailed around very briefly, like a few months, and then immediately came running back to games as a sort of safe harbor. And really, I think that's been a reality for artists for a couple decades at least. That they always say engineers work in games because they're passionate about games. It's almost the least you can make as an engineer. Artists work in games because it's the most you can make as an artist. I don't know if that's still true, especially over the last couple of years, but it was until recently true. And so again, I think kind of as a matter of economic necessity or economic convenience, games were always there. Individual game companies came and went. I've gone through many of them. And been in many different roles in a lot of different companies, but always kind of a work for hire role always working on someone else's idea, but paying the bills and being around a lot of creative people. Like, it's nice to, a lot of the stereotypes about there's Nerf guns everywhere and everyone's just having a great old time. True. There is a lot of that, and also the stereotypes about crunch, also true. In the year 2000, I slept under my desk for 9 days trying to complete a demo for E3. So high highs, low lows, but a job, an industry that in many ways at that time and still does sort of prey on the credulousness of the young, or the willingness and maybe passion to create that young people have. Where am I going with this? Sometime around, I think it's 2009, my wife gave me a couple of copies of the original storyboards that Miyazaki drew for Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. And kind of just sort of hit me like a lightning bolt that I had essentially been in a perpetual waiting state, that I had this career that I sort of fell into and that I could always fall back to, but that wasn't the one that I had chosen. I hadn't made a conscious act to be a games artist or a game developer. And I was just so blown away by the purity of that sort of auteur creation, that a finished Miyazaki movie is in so many ways a very pure distillation of one person's creative vision. And it was really inspiring. My wife, who is Korean, constantly talks about how Americans use the word inspire too loosely. We're always trying to get inspired. We're always working on our personal projects, whatever. But this really, really inspired me. To the point where at first I thought what I wanted to do was just make an animated movie, which, by the way, is a hard thing to do by yourself. Maybe not. Maybe now with AI or whatever. Anyway, but keep AI out of my Miyazaki, by the way. Anyway, I ended up, after a few months sort of flailing around, I left games. I finished up the game Demigod at Gas Powered Games, and then started drawing a comic called Non-Player. And I think that was really the first time in my entire life that I chose that I chose a compass heading and went in that direction. And there were some really great things about that year. Unfortunately, I draw very slowly. I think I'm too much of, I was, at least at that time, too much of a perfectionist. And I think I also, I don't know, maybe had a belief that I had to show via immense labor my quality as an artist. And that meant a very high level of detail and a high level of polish. And it basically took me a year to make one 26-page comic book. It was high enough quality that it got picked up by Image and created within the sphere of independent comic books a little bit of hype, which opened up some doors, including it got optioned a couple of times. It got close to, I don't know how far down the pipe it got in the movie pipeline, but I was suddenly flying back down to LA, talking to movie people and really feeling quite adjacent to, if not part of, Hollywood and all the hype that comes with that. I got a real agent, and lots of people were taking meetings, and it was a very exciting time that felt like the beginning of yet another chapter. But the comic itself was not, I mean, you can't just release one issue of one comic and expect to make a living from that. And of course, you know, the first issue came out and then everyone was like, okay, when's the next issue? And I had nothing. And it would have just, at the level of polish of that first issue, it would have taken me yet another year to make a second issue. And it wasn't paying the bills. It wasn't, I basically had been jobless for a year. And so I had to go back to games. And it was a very, very dark time in my life. Because this really was the renunciation of my first chosen path. I decided I was going to do this thing, and maybe it was even going to help pave the way toward making a movie, which was sort of that thing that I got excited to do the first time. And instead, I was working at a mobile games company, working on a game about sliding shiny gems around. Again, working with people that I really liked working with, making some lifelong friends there. But so far from what I thought I had been granted, what I thought I had achieved. And I remember the shame I used to feel. There was a comic book shop down the road from where I worked, and I would cross the street so that I wouldn't walk directly in front of it, because the people who worked there would recognize me and ask me when the next issue was coming out. And I had a job, and I still worked on, like, I got up at 4 a.m. every morning to put in a couple hours of work on the comic every day, and eventually finished the second issue after 3 years. And it was mostly overlooked, and, you know, the iron was no longer hot. There wasn't really much of a return on this thing, and it was going to take 9 issues to finish the story. By the way, I'm still working on it. I still work on it in the mornings. Issue 3, not coming soon, but coming someday. But the shame that I felt at having felt like I made a promise to the world, this may rhyme with some more recent events, and then not having delivered what people were expecting me to deliver, and just wanting to hide, and feeling like maybe my creative impulse had in some way gotten hijacked by my desire for attention or my desire for notoriety, and then having failed at having achieved that attention or notoriety, and now being noisy motorcycle, now being a cog in a big machine again. Interestingly, the thing that I did to fall sort of maybe back in love with the creative act was I discovered this video game about making modular rockets and flying them in a simulation of orbital mechanics called Kerbal Space Program. And I think it was that notion of like creating things without expectation of reward, creating things without expectation of financial compensation or winning awards or being told by strangers that I'm good at something. Just a really pure act of play that was still creative, you know. And I don't know. I really, it was I think a significant part of my rehabilitation was playing that game and falling in love with space as a topic, and falling in love with the history of space travel, all the stuff that comes with that. And then through a very strange sequence of events, I happened to be work for hire at yet another video game company, and we were offered to bid on KSP2. And the effect that had on my life's trajectory to be in that sort of like dutiful work for hire mode, but then to be presented the opportunity to work on this thing that was actually very important to me, that I was very passionate about, was really like as I'm sure you can imagine, a significant shift from my justification for working in games in all the years preceding. For once, I was working in games on something I cared about a lot. And but it wasn't my thing, right? It's created by this guy, Felipe Falange, aka Harvester, who is brilliant, and it's a brilliant creation. And I became a custodian of a thing that I was passionate about, a steward, if you will, and felt very much the burden of needing to preserve it, to polish it, to enhance it if I could, to not debase its core purpose and its core meaning. And that was a very powerful, scary journey. And it really consumed my life. It was my reason for waking, my reason for doing, my reason for, at least from a professional standpoint, my reason for being. And it had all sorts of interesting components. I have a fear of public speaking. It forced me to confront that. I learned an awful lot about leading a team. I learned an awful lot about collaborating across a large group of people. So many useful lessons. And also, got to be a part of a very large community of very passionate fans. I had been a part of that community before. I got to be a more visible part of that community. And then all the stuff happened that we've talked about before. Someday, maybe more information will emerge about how that all went down, which would be lovely. But what I'm realizing now, in the year since the end of Intercept Games, the company that was making KSP2, I need to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And I kind of find myself in the surprising situation of choosing games as the new path. That perhaps the tools are at a place now where you can create a pure, undistilled manifestation of a coherent creative vision with a very small group of people, in this case 2 people, me and my friend Dan. And it can be flavorful, it can have richness, an emergent richness, and so that's sort of the experiment that I think I'm trying to do with this game I'm working on now called Mailstrom. It's sort of, I guess, a continuation of the experimentation that I've always been doing around finding my voice, figuring out what is my instrument, and in some ways marrying my impulse to create something original with all these job skills that I've accumulated over the years in that job that I fell into that my dad gave me. So it's kind of maybe kind of an acceptance of like, well, this is the thing I've been doing for more than 30 years now. What does it look like if I try to own it? What does it look like if I'm not doing it for hire, but instead doing it to create something new of my own? Which is very energizing. And I think maybe the answer to what do I want to be when I grow up is this. Maybe this is the answer, the thing that's happening right now. And it's all, it's scary too. When you have what you want, then you immediately feel precarious and feel like it could be taken away at any time. And I'm not making any money, and this project will very likely not be able to support me financially. Maybe it will. I'll put the wish list link below. um, it is sort of interesting that like the visual style of this project is in some ways an attempt to like kind of distill the way that I draw into a game setting. So yeah, trying to kind of weave some of those threads together. Who knows? Maybe this Mailstrom idea is adaptable to a storytelling medium as well. I'm not sure, but it's cool to own something like that. Yeah. So 50. I'm about to be 50, and I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, with exactly the kind of people that I want to be doing it with. And in this moment, I feel like I am on the right path. And who knows where it leads? Maybe it leads to some other project. But yeah, just some reflections here on the eve of a half century of life. We'll see if this is a door to some other things, or maybe there's some other path waiting for me on the other side. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for hearing me out. Bye.